3 years ago, South Africa stood on knife's edge. Over 300 lives lost, cities in flames, billions in damages, and a nation left asking, how did we get here? Now, a familiar surname once again makes headlines. Duduzile Zuma Sambudla, daughter of former President Jacob Zuma, is set to stand trial this November, accused of inciting the very unrest that scarred the country in July 2021. Prosecutors allege her digital fingerprints are embedded in the chaos, her online commentary fanning the flames of fury as part of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng descended into anarchy. But beyond the political drama lies a deeper story, one of economic trauma, reputational damage, and a country brand in crisis. The unrest wasn't just a domestic disaster, it reverberated across boardrooms in London, Dubai, and New York, shaking investor confidence, dimming South Africa's tourism allure, and threatening its already fragile global image. And yet, amid the ruins, there are resilience mechanisms, institutions designed not only to reimburse what's been lost, but to help restore faith. So, as the country looks ahead to the pivotal trial, we ask, what is the true cost of civil unrest? Not just in lives or livelihoods, but in the trust that depends and underpins the nation. And how can we begin to rebuild that trust in our institutions, in our economy, and our story as a country? Joining us to unpack this crucial conversation is Tshepo Matseba, Managing Director of Reputation First, as well as Mtho Xulu, business leader who's the CEO of the President of the South Africa Chamber of Commerce and Industry, SABC. We're going to start the conversation here, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me. Really do appreciate it. Mtho, you remember exactly what that week in July was like, embroiled in phone calls, one after the other, with business leaders who weren't able to move their goods across the country from Durban to Gauteng or to other parts of the country, who were worried that their businesses were suffering damage from the civil unrest, and many businesses had to shut down. Many of them didn't survive. Can you talk to us about what the aftermath of that had looked like as far as business rescue and business confidence is concerned in South Africa? What did that rebuilding process look like over the last 4 years?
Good afternoon, Oliver, and thank you very much for having us, and good afternoon to my fellow panelists and viewers. Look, I agree with you. It's almost like yesterday, you know, we saw the country going up in flames, very scary scenes of the destruction of property, but also the endangerment of lives, and obviously somewhat of an orchestrated move to even put in danger the movement of goods coming to the country or goods moving out of the country because KZN was so strategic. The rebuilding, look, every business had to dig deep, unfortunately, to spend money to try and recover what they could. A lot of the properties in KZN really never recovered. Some of those jobs were never recovered. And it has also placed our public liability budget at risk. As you see, SASRIA is also readjusting how we cover civil unrest. The problem, obviously, over time is that even though we had the HRC report coming out, a lot of those findings and recommendations were not fully implemented. So businesses still remain vulnerable in terms of the level of violent protest that happens in South Africa, which always threatens business. So I think what we need to do, we need to be able to go back to those recommendations and see how the state, in terms of security, we've invested in resilience to protect property, and also how we are able to dig deep into those fundamental socio-economic challenges that became so vulnerable for mobilization at that time.
Yeah, importantly, Mtho, is also the question around whether or not we had businesses realize for the first time that they were underinsured or not insured at all. And insurance companies had to ask themselves these very tough questions and price into the premium, the cost of unrest in South Africa. And of course, actuaries are smart enough, they'll come up with a formula and they'll figure out what the true cost of unrest truly is. But ultimately, it's you and I as consumers and business owners and you know, consumers to businesses that bear the cost of being able to price in the cost of unrest. Have businesses adjusted to a country that is volatile, that at any moment can experience such a moment again?
Yes, it was a rude awakening for business insurance. I think all the private insurers have done a risk adjustment on South Africa, which is unfortunate because, as you mentioned, then is passed on to consumers. SASRA itself, who is responsible for public liability, have also started changing their own rules, and I think they're going to move an amendment bill for them to protect the buffers that they have to have in place to maintain insurance. But the most important thing about this thing and the danger about this thing is that it's not always about pricing it in, because what you start doing that, you start creating not uninsurable pockets of society. So if people take a view that a particular region in South Africa is prone to civil unrest, those areas become uninsurable, and if they are uninsurable, they are unable to attract investment. So I think the root cause is not so much so to say how much can we stretch the rules. It's about how do we minimize disruption, because insurance is part and parcel of business. But once you start having to have a line item for civil unrest, you are walking a very tight rope, because at firstly, it becomes expensive to operate, it's a cost of business, and ultimately it creates areas, no-go areas for businesses. And in a country like this, we can't afford to have places where people are afraid to invest because the cost of doing business is just so dangerous. So I think the root cause is, yes, we need to always be risk averse and be able to adjust our risk profile. But ultimately, you need to have stability so that the cost of investing in this country is not always overshadowed by the likelihood of violent civil unrest.
Yeah. Tshepo, I want to bring you into the conversation. When moments like the 2021 July unrest took place, of course, and I must also preface here that it really only happened in Gauteng and in KZN, that the other 7 provinces of the country didn't experience that. They were observers and witnesses to that, because that's where the damage and the unrest happened. But it was the whole country that took a reputational knock there. It was the whole country that was seen, at least from an outside perspective and an outside lens, as being unsafe and as being unattractive as an investment destination. And of course, we had to collectively build that reputation back. Do you think we've recovered from that reputational knock in the last 4 years?
Thank you, Oliver. No, I don't think we've recovered yet. So the critical factor about the events that we're talking about is not necessarily really about whether it happened in Gauteng only or KZN or both, because those 2 provinces are probably significant contributors to South Africa's economy. And therefore, it makes it a South African matter that over a period of time, we create a space and environment where investors have a predictable nature that says that South Africa is ungovernable, and at any given point in time, as an investor, you think violence can erupt. And we seem to be hung on the perhaps historical activity around burning flames when we protest, when we want to tell a story. And it says that there are 2 problems. At a societal level, we have to address the question of how we express ourselves and how we protest. And then at a leadership level, both in business and in government, you want to start a process perhaps of reflecting on the decisions that we take to either, for example, provide consistent services to people, create a safe environment for business and citizens to live, so that individuals and groups may find themselves wanting, if they use violence and excessive violence that we've seen now in Ekurhuleni, in Germiston with the Home Affairs building in flame. We've seen what happened in Soweto the other day in terms of e-hailing at Maponya Mall. And we continue to see these visuals that each time as South Africans have a gripe or pain that they're going through, that may be economic or social, that our first point of call is a violence. And it is that psyche, I think, that needs to be revisited, that we need to work on as a society and as a leadership of the country.
If enough time passes, Tshepo, we tend to forget about tragic moments like that. And there are key moments in the news media and in our life cycles that perhaps reinscribe those moments. The trial of Duduzile Zuma and her reappearance in court, I guess, reinscribes that into the national conversation. This is why we're having this conversation. And it refreshes our memory. Is time the great equalizer, or do we have to do more than just wait it out for it to fade into obscurity for us to be able to say, yeah, well, we've overcome the reputational damage of 2021?
No, and that's why we are fortunate to actually have institutions such as SASRA that we need to actually embrace as a country and protect, that can help companies, organizations to recover as quickly as possible from the kind of disaster that we have experienced. However, it is an effort that as a society we need to take a lead in transforming the way we engage in conversation, but also in communicating a progressive message to investors and international communities, so that they don't necessarily see the negative visuals of protest and how we communicate, because that would actually say to an investor, to a tourist, am I safe in going to that environment? Is my business safe in going to that environment to invest? And so there's opportunity, I think, for leaders to communicate and drive, especially in rural areas, in townships, in our cities, to drive a message of responsible protesting, responsible engagement, robust engagement, and then for leaders to do their job. Because if you simply provide the services that people require, you are likely to minimize the levels of damage and protests that we see, so that we don't solve problems through courts and through flames, but rather that we go back to the drawing table. And maybe there's an important question about this national dialogue that we're having right now, and how we can use that as an instrument to educate communities, to remind citizens about their very needed responsibility to look after the infrastructure of the country, because that in itself is looking after the jobs and livelihoods.
Yeah. Mtho, when South African leaders and businesses engage in important forums like, say, the World Economic Forum that happens in Davos every year, do South Africans face the question of safety and security?
Yes, unfortunately, it still remains one of those, because remember, we still have a very stubbornly high crime rate. You know, not only does it place businesses at risk, it starts off with the safety of people. I mean, the bedrock of any economy is the safety and the productivity of their humans. So there are people who are still vulnerable in terms of whether they are able to be attracted to certain parts of the country to work there. So we always have to create an environment to say people and professionals can come and invest and work in this economy. And obviously, because we also want to attract global businesses, those businesses are unlikely to be here to babysit their businesses. So they invest in subsidiaries that they hope will work and function independently in South Africa. So for someone who sits out of the country, they need to be given a sense of comfort that if I invest in a foreign nation, the laws of the country and the people of the country will be able to protect it. So unfortunately, we still have this overhang over South Africa that we remain a violent country. It is violent in terms of protesting. There's a lot of crime against people and businesses. So it's something that we must never keep our eyes off, because not only is it just a contact crime, you know that we're also grappling with cyber crimes, we're also grappling with financial crimes, and you also have organized crimes such as Zamazamas. All those actually feed into a pot of a country that is grappling with a business crime. So it's something that we always talk about, but we also are working with our counterparts in law enforcement to say, let us put a story that, over and above the fact that we've detected crime, how are we able to put instruments in place to mitigate the impact and ultimately remove crime from businesses and ultimately those professionals that must run those companies.
Yeah, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and your insights this afternoon, gentlemen. Really do appreciate it. Mtho Xulu, the president of the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, as well as Tshepo Matseba, who is a brand specialist. We're going